Hey there, today we are talking about launching or in some cases relaunching in the new normal. So, a quick introduction to who we are. My name is Jake Jacobson. I'm the Vice President of Growth and Partnerships at Native Digital, a Kansas City based marketing firm.
Yeah, and I'm Justin Watkins, CEO at Native Digital. One of the things we're going to talk about here is just the fact that there's so many people competing for attention. A lot of these people are launching either a new business, a new startup, a new nonprofit, a new product. There's just a lot of movement out in the marketplace. And one of the things when we present this live is we like to see if people have a gauge on just how much there is. And so we ask the question to say, just in terms of startups in the US, every month, how many do you think are launching? Is it 700 a month, 7,000 a month? Is it 77,000 a month? And then the cruel thing that we do is the next slide shows that we're actually underestimating this. It's actually 775,000 a month startups launch in the US. And that's more than it has been in the past. 15 years ago, it was 20% less than that. Now, if you look in other industries, you'll find that even the most established companies who've been around for many years, they're launching too, not necessarily a business, but maybe a business unit or a product. And if you look at the different companies and you start to sector them out by how successful they are, that top quadrant launches 36% more product offerings than the ones below them. Now, to me, this is a little bit kind of flying against some of my beliefs in the sense that more is not always the answer. But it doesn't say how many products that they're also eliminating. But this shows that there's just a lot of action, a lot of new things that there's being offered. And even if we look at the nonprofit sector, you find the same thing. The number of 501c public charities, it's up 45% over the past 15 years. Here you can see the number of nonprofits that are launched every year. And there's really a pretty dramatic climb here between even 2015 and 2020.
So, the reason we're having this conversation today is because simply people be launching, or in some cases relaunching. With all of the changes that early 2020 have brought to us, we're doing a lot of reintroductions. Whether it's from hitting pause possibly on some different initiatives that you were doing, or just trying to reintroduce yourself to the public, people be launching. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And part of that is that there are more and more brands competing for our attention. We already saw the number of new launches, new initiatives, but just think about the amount of noise out there that's always competing for that attention.
Yeah, and one of the things that's well known in business is it's not just a new business or it's also new products that the failure rate on these is pretty high. Having a new initiative, it tends to be that over the next 5 to 10 years, that a majority of them don't work out. They don't meet the goals that they set out to do, and it's because it's difficult, it's hard, and part of that is because it's such a competitive space. So a big part of what we're going to do here is walk through why that is and how we can avoid that and make sure we can capture the thing that is the hardest thing to capture, which is people's attention. Yeah, and then the other thing that we talk about also is it's not that brands are starving, that they are hungry and needing more and more. It's that they are trying to chase too many things, that they've got indigestion from all these things that they're trying to be.
Also, just a great gift to be able to use to start us off.
Right.
But we all know that being awesome, period, at anything is really hard. Being awesome at 100 things is extremely hard. But the catch is for all of us communicators, successfully communicating those 100 things that you're trying to be awesome at is even harder. And so that's where we're going to try to really make some choices today to not only decide who we are, but who we aren't. Because when attention is low, which is always in today's environment, you've got to be sharp as a knife. So with that in mind, let's get to our points.
Yeah, and I think the first point we're going to make on this is naming. There's really two camps here on naming. And there's people who say it's hard. A name has to convey your value prop. It's got to pack a punch. It needs to be ownable. There's also people you'll talk to and say, hey, naming's the easiest thing. You can really name it anything and be successful. I mean, look at Google. And that's the company that I often hear is, even Google, look at them. So let's talk about them. A lot of people don't know that Google was not the original name. In '96, when it formed as a company, it was actually called Backrub, partially because A lot of their product was geared around backlinks. Fortunately, they did rename as Google, and Google is an idea, or it represents an idea. It's less of a thing; it's more of an idea of what it represents. So if you look at a lot of different names, there's really, when you're naming your business or your product, there's a couple different camps that you can choose from. You can be descriptive, you can have more of a metaphor, like Google as an example. You can be an abstract thought where you get to pour your own meaning into it. It can be named after the founder, or it can be an acronym. But what we find is that, if you're trying to communicate quickly, if you're trying to grab attention, there's a few of these that are better than others. So what we really like are the descriptive names, and we also like the metaphorical names, especially if you are trying to grab attention quickly. So the nice thing about descriptive is it explains it quickly. It talks about the product or the value prop. So Facebook, you kind of have an idea of what it might be. Groupon, it's group coupons, right? It kind of tells you what it is right there. Google and Nike represent this idea. It evokes an emotion. They get to pour meaning into it. It also kind of grabs your attention just by the interest of the name. So, the other approaches aren't bad. It's just that they're a bit more of an empty vessel. It can represent anything you want, but it also means that you have to put a lot of time and attention, spend money into putting a message out there of what it does mean. So in terms of just grabbing people's attention quickly, we like the other two, and do think that naming is a pretty important piece.
Yeah, and as Justin was saying, when it is up to you, the burden comes the clear messaging to try to describe exactly what that name is and what the service you offer. So we're going to take a quick look at what that messaging entails. And first of all, as you'll hear often today, we've got short attention spans. And, oftentimes if we're talking to a group, I'll ask everybody if this resonates with them, and half the people in the audience are right there doing that as I'm asking them. So you want to make sure that every second counts. You want to find a way to slow the scroll. You want to find that thumb catcher. And the best way to do that is open strong. So you have to put a lot of thought into your headline and really think about what is going to grab that attention. But you can't stop there. You also have to close strong. You have to figure out what's the tagline, what's the mantra, what's the rally cry, what do you want them to do? Because there have been plenty of times where something has stopped my attention. Maybe I've even, kind of raised an eyebrow or chuckled at it, but then I realized 3 minutes later, I wouldn't have known what brand that was because they didn't close strong. So you really want to balance those two out. And so what we do a lot with a lot of our clients is that we literally develop a playbook. Just like any coach out there, we develop a playbook all around messaging where we look at different situations, audiences, different headlines that could be used for different scenarios and different supporting points. And then we exercise it, just like with everything, you got to exercise. And also this is where we get to make it fun. We teach these different messaging playbooks, but then we also have everyone else in the room be very active with it. So there might be times where we put up a quiz that says, which one of this fits our brand voice and which one doesn't? How would you adapt this to fit the brand voice? And really the great thing about that is you start to realize that your brand voice is something that should come alive, not make you bored. Because if you're bored writing it, someone's definitely going to be bored reading it. Then, once you establish all your rules, go ahead and break them. Again, you want to have some fun with this, and you want to realize that there's a difference between a playbook and a cookie cutter, and you can't have the cookie cutter. So you want to have this playbook that's still adaptable. Because in the environment we're in, standing out ain't easy. And I know right now you're even scanning the screen to figure out which ones you know, which ones you don't, which ones make you laugh, which ones you've used. And so we're trying to compete with all of this as well as all the other brands out there when we're going for attention. So we like to say to make it 10% wrong. Wait a second. Nope, not wrong. Wait just a second. 1 second. There we go. Make it 10% wrong. Because when you're doing that, that's where people really roll to it. Because anymore, thanks to the internet, we've been shown everything. And so many things are polished so perfectly that we can smell advertising a mile away. So what we like to think is that wrong is real. It makes it relatable, it steals our attention, and it reminds you that there's a human on the other side of that talking to a human.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the other thing that communicates quickly and grabs attention is design. It always has. One of the things that's difficult about design is it's so subjective. When you're launching a new effort and you say, hey, is design and the aesthetics, is it critical or is it a nice to have? A lot of people wish they could say it's critical. The truth is almost always it ends up being a nice to have. So One of the things that we've tried to do is say, you know, the nice thing about design is it communicates something very quickly. It shows people a level of taste, but it also shows a level of detail. And so I think people subconsciously say to themselves, I'm going to pay attention to this because clearly I can see that you paid attention to this as well. But one of the things that gets in the way is the B word. It's the budget. Design can increase cost, especially if it's not viewed as critical. So one of the things that we wanted to do was quantify this. And it made me think of a study that I saw about 5 years ago. And what they did was they found 16 of the most design-centric publicly traded firms. And they just wanted to see if these truly are the most design-centric, how do they perform in comparison to the rest of the Fortune 500. So this is the companies that they compared, and they actually went through quite a bit of rigor to find these companies and evaluate them. But it's no surprise you've got people like Apple, Nike, and Target on here. And what they found is that just looking at this one factor, and they called this the design value index, what they found was that it did outperform. So in a 10-year period, comparing these, you saw that they outperformed by about 211%. So I've always remembered this. I think it's one of the best studies in terms of this. And so we went back and looked at it because it's been 5 years since we saw this. And what we found was they haven't continued this. So we were very suspicious. Maybe it hasn't performed. Maybe the research has been reversed. Maybe that was not a good factor. So we actually dug a little deeper on this, and we continued the study up to 2020. And it turns out they outperformed an incredible amount. It's no longer 200 something percent. It's now 600 something percent. And so this has really held up over time. Now, again, we're in a period right now where the stock market is completely sideways and upside down. But if we believe these principles can work over a 15-year period, I don't know why they can't work over the next 15-year period. So again, it's really just trying to quantify that design pays. Yeah, and of course.
So what we're saying is, yeah, strong design pays off, as you can tell by her reaction. So while we're talking money, let's talk about price, because we're sitting here talking about dollars and cents, and you might be wondering, what role does price have in a launch conversation or in a design, messaging, communications conversation? Well, it's because there's three variables at play here, and it's your cost, it's the price that you're marketing this at, and it's the perceived value. And so again, this is nothing new to people who are launching products, but realizing where they are in that spectrum is the important part. So when we ask what's price have to do with a launch, it's because it quickly communicates value. Now there's different ways that you can look at this. I mean, you might be down here, and that's fine. You might be looking at the budget audience, you might have a budget messaging, but the important thing is that they're still in that order. You also might want to get up here. When you're looking up there at that high perceived value, that luxury brand, then you can justify that higher price. What you don't want is to get into this spot where you have a high price, a low perceived value, and then suddenly people aren't really sure what they're paying for.
Yeah, and I think what you get when you put all this stuff together is that essentially when you meet a new customer, is you're saying, hi, we're blank, this is our name, and this is what we have to offer, this is our message. And you don't even have to say it, but you're thinking, like, it looks good, doesn't it? This design is really showing this off. It costs less than you think. The thing that's great about a strong name, message, and design is that perceived value rises. And so when they do see the price, they're like, this is a good deal. And whenever you don't have all those things working for you, a lot of times that perceived value is lower. It makes everything a little bit harder.
All right, so do we have your attention still? All right, good. All right, so let's shift to keeping their attention. I mean, otherwise we can go back and do that dance. We've done it before. But let's move on and talk about participation, because other parts of this presentation you may have thought about before, but I think participation is an often overlooked aspect to a successful launch. So if we look at our audience, this is your whole audience curve, and you can see that 85% would qualify themselves as that mainstream audience, and you want those people, you need those people, but in what order? because we would argue that the influential 15% are the key to making everyone else have that buy-in. And why is that? It's because when we look at the two different characteristics, and neither of these are right or wrong, neither of these are good or bad. Again, it's just the order that you're going to approach them in. And you may even find yourself on different parts of this, like maybe buying a car, you are more on the mainstream, but booking a trip, you're more on the influential side. So again, it's just realizing who you're talking to and why, because that influential side, they want to be ahead of the curve. They want access and relationship. That's social currency for them. And they want it to be new and innovative, and they're willing to buy on potential because they've heard your messaging, they've seen your creative, and they're excited about it. Then on the mainstream side of things, they're a little bit more practical. So these are the ones who want convenience and they want proof. They want validation, often from the influential half of the audience. They want it to be easy and effective. They want it to be pretty turnkey, and they want to buy the endorsed leader. So these are the folks who are checking all the different reviews, how many stars. And so the way we like to think about it is the influential part of your audience writes the reviews that will influence the mainstream part of your audience. And so that's why we always feel it's so important to start with that influential side and then work toward the mainstream. And what's great is that it's not even that big of a mystery, because right now, whether you're a big brand, whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're a startup, you should be able to think, who are your biggest fans? And you know them, but just take a second and think of who they are literally by name, because these are the people who have an interest in your mission and they have a voice in your community. And this is where we talk about influencers, lowercase I, not uppercase I. These are the folks who actually have some sway and some clout with all of the people that you're trying to reach. And then the next question is, how can you give them exclusive access? What kind of things can you offer while also being comfortable giving up some control to them? Because they're going to want to talk about it in their own voice. And so they're not going to take a script or an advertising message and just repeat it. But you have to be willing to do that because you're investing in a long-term relationship. This is not a transactional, please come to my soft opening and say great things about my restaurant. You're looking for a long-term relationship.
So I think one way we can make this a little bit more real is to talk about a client example. And to do that, we're going to start in Silicon Valley. So we work with the city of San Jose. And before we started that relationship, we showed up at City Hall the same week that this article was published, the most forgettable city in America. And so we were working with the city of San Jose, and we wanted to raise city self-esteem, draw in more talent, draw in more businesses. And to do that, we started by listening. And we created a list of 40 community leaders, but also tastemakers, artists, and activists. And we sat down with each one of them and really listened and looked at the commonalities between people who had very opposing views with other things in life. What we ended up proposing from day one was that we were going to roll this out through more of a grassroots effort and make sure that there was adoption of the ideas and the messaging that we're putting out before we got into formal communications. We felt like this was the only way to get adoption was to participate and do this in much more grassroots ways versus just the typical way where you launch the press release, you have the big unveiling, and you tell people what you're doing versus participating with them. So we felt like we already had a name. The city is San Jose. What we needed was a mark, and they didn't have that mark. There was no visual cue that said, that's where I live, that's the city, that's something I'm proud of. And so we went through the typical iterations to come up with this mark, which represented the valley, also represented diversity. You see there with the accent mark that we made sure remained. And then the J represents this sort of churning of ideas and flow, also this sort of California lifestyle. And we shopped this around to those different tastemakers and said, is this something that represents you? Is this something that you'd be proud of wearing? And we worked with them to make sure that we got this to the right place. The thing that we did that was, again, pretty unusual was the typical method is to blast that out everywhere, do a lot of paid media. We wanted to test this out and make sure that more people in the community would adopt it. What we did was we went to a craft fair and that had a lot of people in the community there. And we set up a booth that had really no logos on it. Nobody knew who was funding this. And we just pulled ink on t-shirts. And we sold t-shirts with that logo. We sold some that also just had different mantras and phrases that we were trying out. And we sat back and we paid attention to who's buying these, which ones are they buying? Are there ones that have no interest and ones that have a lot of interest? And what we found was everybody wanted the logo t-shirt. They hadn't seen anything like that. They felt like it did represent them and they were proud to wear it. And so that passed our test. Had that not worked, we would have went back to the drawing board. But because it did, we were able to move forward and advance in our plans. The next thing that we did after that t-shirt was we started distributing stickers, and we would take them to bike shops and coffee shops, and we would leave a stack of them on the counter and talk with the business owner and say, hey, can we leave these here? They're free to take. And we would go back on a weekly basis to see if people did not like them, it didn't represent them, and so they didn't take them, or were they gone? And what we were happy to find out was every time we go back, he'd say, yeah, I'll take some more of those stickers. People like them. It was about that time we started seeing them showing up on bumpers around town, on laptops. We even had a meeting with the mayor, and his right-hand person said that it showed up on her high school son's phone case. And that is valuable real estate in his mind. So she said we had infected the high school with this mark. At the same time, if you walked around town, you would see these posters that were really trying to get our voice and our messaging out there. And you'll notice that there is no place where there's a logo or sponsored by the city of San Jose. It was really more about getting the message and adoption of this idea than it was about taking ownership and knowing where it's from. We even did a photo shoot with a flag and placed ads in one of the local magazines. And again, the point isn't taking ownership, it's just making sure that people buy into this. One of the predictions we made was that if we're successful, someone will accuse City Hall of stealing this. And this is about the same time that we did see, because we had social listening set up, that people were saying, hey, it looks like the city is trying to claim this as their own, because we're seeing it on now paid media places. Once we went over to that formal communications, people were saying, hey, who's stealing this? I don't know which artist made this or if it was a magazine, but it looks like they're taking this from somebody. And so we felt like that was success. People had so much buy-in to that that they wanted to make sure it stayed pure and true. It did start working its way into the formal communications. You could start seeing it in different media ad spots. You could see it in City Hall. It is something that I think a lot of people feel like they have buy-in and are proud to associate themselves with, and proud to see that their city has adopted it. One of the things that happened in this process was it really started taking on a life of its own. At one point, there was an Instagram post with somebody who had tattooed this on their leg, and our team saw it and just could not believe it. We could not believe someone took this mark and tattooed it. We were giving each other high fives, thought this was so cool. It turns out the story was deeper than that. It was by a man named Jake who decided to start running the streets. This is Jake on the left. This is also Jake in the middle. He started running the streets of San Jose, and he decided to run every single city street in the city, and was able to lose a lot of weight in the process. And he celebrated by running the San Jose Marathon. And when he finished that, he celebrated that by getting this tattoo. And so it picked up a lot of press. Even the mayor jumped in and said, hey, if I get 1 million retweets, I'll get the logo tattooed on as well. He didn't quite make it. But this was something that, was cooler than we could have imagined. I mean, we could have never come up with this idea of let's have a guy lose 180 pounds, run a marathon, and then get a tattoo. Couldn't have come up with that idea, couldn't afford to pay him to do it. And he did this on his own. It's because he felt buy into this idea. And I think this is what participation can do for brands when they truly do it. The other thing is you'll see and hear a lot of people talk about movements and make promises about that. What we would say is until it moves without you moving it, it's not a movement. And this is one of those examples where it really started moving without us, and it couldn't have been a better example.
But also there's a bit of a warning that goes along with this, and that is that participation requires patience. Again, you don't just get to drop a logo and then suddenly someone tattoos it on their leg. Instead, you really have to get participation from the grassroots up, and everyone is in short supply. And so you really need that authentic buy-in. What I loved about Jake's Facebook post is it even says, San Jose, I wasn't born here, but it's my home. It's not perfect, but no city is. And so when you talk about building participation, suddenly you're getting champions and advocates coming out of the corners that you never would have expected.
Yeah, and so this is the thing that I think trips up a lot of people from really doing participation. It's because everybody's in a big damn hurry. We want that flash in the pan. We're going to go big or go home. We're paying for everything. We're trying everything. Patience is more about building a foundation. And very few invest in the time it takes to do that. I think it also is important to run lean experiments. The problem with lean experiments is the cost is right, but the time is way too long. And so for being patient, it is leveraging paid, but it's also leveraging earned and shared media. And it's really committing to doing the right things. It's not trying everything. It's really trying to find those few things that are really going to work for you.
So just to sum up everything we've talked about today, whether you're launching a new product, a new initiative, relaunching any of those things that maybe you've had to hit pause on, or even just reintroducing yourself to your target audience, you need to communicate quickly and sharply. And all of that includes the right name, design, messaging, and yes, even price. That all has to be the right fit. And when you need to hold that attention, that is how you lay the groundwork for participation.
Yeah, thanks for sticking with us today, guys, and going through this. I know there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and that is the word of the moment, but we're also doing something that can be quite a bit of fun. I'd encourage everybody to stay loose and stay light. And again, thank you for your attention today. If we can help you guys out at all, if there's more information that you'd want, hit us up at Native Digital. We'd love to chat with you guys and see if there's anything we can do to be of assistance. Again, thanks for watching.
Thanks, guys.